Welcome everyone to our second Golden Zoomies, which is on the topic of nutrition. And we have two very eminent speakers today, which I did promise you in the last call that we had. First off, I'd just like to get the team members who are running this to introduce themselves. Amy, perhaps you could start.
Hi everyone, I'm Amy Torres. I'm the Executive Assistant for Scientific Programs here, so I work right under Janet. I'm really excited to be here today.
And Emily.
Hi everyone, I'm Emily and I am a veterinary research assistant with the operations team with the study. So I work a lot in the contact center. If you've emailed or called us, there's a decent chance that we've spoken.
Excellent. One of our speakers is Dr. Marge Chandler. Marge, would you like to tell us a bit about yourself?
Okay, thanks, Janet. And I go back a ways, a long way. Actually. We were office mates in New Zealand when I was doing my residency, and she was PhD or residency?
It was PhD,
yeah. PhD at that time. So I'm a veterinarian. I did a little time in mixed practice and then have specialized in internal medicine and in veterinary clinical nutrition, and am boarded in both those areas. Worked as an internist for quite a long time and am now focusing a little bit more on the nutrition side, but still doing internal medicine as well.
Excellent. And you're sitting there in Scotland.
I am today. In Scotland near Edinburgh, yes.
Excellent. And our second speaker is Dr. Eleanor Raffan. So Eleanor, if you could maybe tell us a bit about yourself.
Hi everyone. So I'm another vet. I was actually taught by Marge when I was at vet school in Edinburgh, but since then I kind of worked my way down south, and having done specialist training, so I'm an internal medicine specialist too, but really since about 2009 I've mainly focused on combining being a vet and a scientist. So I'm interested in the genetics of diabetes and obesity and metabolic disease, amongst lots of other things, and combining studying dog diseases and human diseases in my job as a lecturer at the University of Cambridge here in the UK.
There you go. I told you they were eminent. Someone from the University of Cambridge and Marge, who just has that enormous experience in nutrition that really is so rare. Okay, we're going to start off with Marge, put her on the spot. Thank you for everyone who sent questions in. We're going to get through all of those actually. So my first question for Marge is, we often receive questions about dilated cardiomyopathy, or we call this DCM, and its relationship with grain-free diets. And for those of you who have dogs in the study, we really haven't seen very many cases of DCM in general. I mean, it's not only caused by potentially nutritional causes. So Marge, as a nutritional scientist, what can you tell us about this?
Well, first of all, what Janet just said is really important and correct. Is not all dilated cardiomyopathy in dogs is due to diet. Some of it is breed related and other problems. But about 3 years ago, it was recognized by a couple of the universities, UC Davis in California and also Tufts in Boston, that they were seeing dilated cardiomyopathy in breeds not normally considered to be at risk for this. And fortunately, both of these schools also have good nutritionists who work with their cardiology departments, and they got good diet histories on these dogs, and it turns out a lot of them were being fed grain-free diets. So the FDA started collecting information on this and has identified a little bit more about the ingredients. And then Tufts, the University of Tufts has gone on to do a little bit more research into this as well. It isn't necessarily grain-free seems to be the problem with these diets. And I will say we don't understand precisely what the problem is. It's not necessarily the absence of grains. It looks more like it's an inclusion of other ingredients when grains are omitted from the diet. So a lot of the grain-free diets include peas and lentils and potatoes and sweet potatoes, and some of these pulses like lentils and peas were identified to be within the first 10 ingredients in the diets that were causing these problems. So these are often the ingredients that are put in when grain is left out. So it came up in the grain-free diets. It does not in general seem to be related to taurine. We do know the deficiency in the amino acid taurine can cause dilated cardiomyopathy in some breeds more than others. In general, this diet-related DCM is not a taurine deficiency. However, as you guys are golden retriever owners, which there's been a lot of those in my family too, it can be due to taurine deficiency in golden retrievers. They are a breed at risk for that. So my recommendation, I think there was somebody just asking what would you feed, aside from the other types of DCM. I'm not going to go into low sodium and on some of the other things that you might consider in that. But if it is a dog who has developed what we would consider a diet or nutrition associated DCM, they've been on one of these diets. They just need to go on a good regular diet that isn't grain-free, that doesn't include peas. Look like they might be one of the culprits in one of the studies. Peas came up as a high ingredient that was different between the diets of the dogs who had the problem and the diets of the dogs who did not have the problem. But peas, lentils, potatoes, sweet potatoes, other pulses, things like that have all been kind of in the mix. So if I had a dog or saw a dog with a problem like this, I would switch them to a diet, a more conventional diet that did not have these ingredients in it. Did that answer the whole question? Did you have more than that? Oh, you did also have, go ahead.
No, I think that's a great answer. Did you have anything else to add to that?
Oh, you had mentioned before that somebody asked about WSAVA, the World Small Animal Veterinary Association, certifying diets. I'm involved with WSAVA, and I did want to point out we don't certify diets. We don't advocate for any particular companies or endorse any companies or any brands or any specific diets. We do have information that we'll put up later in the presentation about how to evaluate diets and how to maybe select a diet for your dog. But we don't do the endorsing. We just give general suggestions about evaluating a diet.
And could you tell some of our listeners what WSAVA stands for? They might not know.
I did say it, but I said it really fast. The World Small Animal Veterinary Association.
Excellent. For those of you who've joined the call, make sure you check out the chat for instructions, and you can put some questions up there. Down the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little thing that says Q&A, so feel free to add further questions as we go on. Marge, you're also talking about taurine, and we do have a scientist at UC Davis with some of the samples from the dogs in the study looking at taurine levels and how those are influenced by different diets. Okay, second question for Marge. How do raw diets compare with, for example, kibbled food? And does it make sense to mix those types of foods together?
You can't really do a direct comparison. All the studies that I've seen, which isn't very many, where they've tried to compare them, there's only a handful where they've actually looked at a raw diet and a kibble diet and evaluated. There's a kitten study. There were some studies in itchy bull terriers, very, very little on this. And part of the problem with all of the studies that I've seen so far, other than a little bit of work that Terry Swanson in Illinois has done, and that wasn't against kibble, that was cooked. Well, there was kibble in those studies too, but largely you're comparing apples and oranges, or maybe you're comparing oranges with apple pie, because all of the studies comparing the two have different ingredients. We're not comparing exactly the same ingredients. So you've got the processing, you've got the ingredients, you've got a whole lot of different things going on when you compare them. So having said that, in some aspects of some of the raw diets, they might be more highly digestible. Is that always a good thing? It depends on the dog. That can be a good thing. It's basically like having a really low fiber human diet. That could be a good thing. It could maybe not be a good thing, depending on the individual. I don't usually personally recommend them because of the very high risk of bacterial contamination in them. And freezing does not get rid of that. It decreases one of the bacteria, the number of those bacteria you would have, but all the other pathogenic bacteria, they love being frozen and thawed. They will just grow like crazy as soon as you thaw them. So it doesn't, somebody asked if it combines to mix the two together. I don't recommend feeding raw at all. So For me, it doesn't make sense to do that. There are some people that feel that if you feed it, you need to separate them. You don't need to separate them. It would be like saying, well, you have to have your salad at lunch and your steak at dinner, and you can't have them in the same meal. It doesn't matter if you're going to feed raw, if you're mixing it in with the kibble. It doesn't matter if they're mixed or separate or however you're going to do that.
Excellent. All right, now, some people are putting questions in the chat. I'm going to go through those, but please put them in Q&A, which is down kind of bottom right. Cynthia here says she had her Goldie from 8 weeks to the present 11 years. She's always been on the conventional diet as recommended by her vet. She would not know what a pea, lentil or sweet potato is, even though I am a vegetarian and she is not. And Cynthia, yes, I'm also a vegetarian and my dogs are most definitely not. So I know where you're coming from. A little question here for you, Marge. Different topic. How accurate are blood tests for determining food allergies for dogs?
They're not. Is the short answer. They're not. They have very poor correlation with the actual foods that dogs react to or don't react to. I'm a little puzzled as to why these tests are still around. One of the GI people in Bristol, Ed Hall, used to say, oh, just send me the money and I'll make up something for you instead, which is, in order to know what foods a dog or many of us are going to react to, you actually need to do a proper feeding trial. The tests are, they're not entirely a waste of money, but they largely are. The one place that they might have a value is for possibly selecting some foods to do a trial. But I've had even lots of owners say, well, the test said he can't eat chicken and he can. It's like, yeah, that's because the tests don't work very well.
That was a pretty straightforward answer. Okay, one more question for you, Marge, and then we'll move on to Eleanor. And that is, we've had a number of questions about diets for senior dogs, and we actually talked about senior dogs as the topic of our last Zoomies. So can you just give us your advice on how to feed our golden oldies?
Did you want to do that now, or did you want to do that in the second half? Did you have a specific question?
We can do it now. You give us your philosophy on senior.
Because that's kind of long. How are we doing for time?
Oh, okay. Well, I'll tell you what. I'll give you a short question.
Okay.
From the audience, then we'll go to Eleanor, and you can think about senior dogs. So here's a short question, or maybe a long one. I have 2 dogs with autoimmune thyroiditis, and I have been advised to put my dogs on gluten-free food. I'm feeding them a food now that is gluten-free but not grain-free. Can you comment, this is an interesting one, on the relationship between gluten and thyroid issues?
In dogs, I don't think there's any proven relationship between the two at all. The only, and even that's, well, there's 2 potential gluten problems in dogs. One was in a family of British Irish setters who had GI problems from gluten. However, that line of Irish setters is no longer being bred, and none of us gastroenterologists have seen an Irish setter with a gluten enteropathy, a GI problem due to gluten in a decade. There are some border terriers with what's called Spike's disease, which is a neurological disorder, which does seem to improve in some of those dogs when they are on a gluten-free diet. As far as being related to an immune-mediated disorder, which is what the thyroiditis is that you're describing, I have never seen that associated with gluten. As long as it's not grain-free otherwise, as long as it's not containing lots of peas and lentils, there's probably no contraindication, no reason not to feed that diet. But I'm not convinced it's going to help the thyroid problem. There might be something I don't know about, but I've never run across that.
Okay, that is a very straightforward answer. Thank you, Marge. We'll give you a bit of a break. Someone had asked something about fish oil with osteoarthritis. We'll get to that when we talk about senior dogs. So now we're on to Eleanor. And Eleanor, I know you have done some amazingly interesting work on obesity, which is a huge problem for dogs in general. For those of you on the study, almost 40% of the dogs in our study would be classified as overweight and a small percentage as obese. I know you're going to love this, so I'll hand this over to Eleanor.
Now, have I successfully shared my screen with a picture of a Labrador on it? Well, that's good. It doesn't show up quite as clearly as I'd hoped. I'm going to do a terrible thing on a golden Zoomies Zoom call, and that's talk about Labradors. I think I'm unapologetic in that, and that's partly because this is an interesting story, and the fact that it's in Labradors shouldn't be that much of a problem, and partly because it's a really good illustration of the kind of problems that we have in our pet dog population, and how genetics can affect obesity. And so we've been studying Labradors for several years now, but really I study obesity in pet dogs, and I do that for dogs' sake because obesity is a really big problem in our pet dog population. The fact that about 40% of the golden retriever lifetime study dogs are overweight or frankly obese is pretty good scores, actually, because other population surveys suggest that up to 2/3 of dogs become overweight by the time they hit middle age. And so my suspicion is that as a cohort, you golden Zoomies are pretty good at managing your pets and pretty good at getting on top of their weight gain before it becomes really problematic. But certainly this is a really big deal for the pet dog population. And in general, vets and knowledgeable dog people have tended just to kind of blame owners for being a bit rubbish about their pets' management. But I come at this from rather a different angle, because actually we understand that although, yes, any animal, human, animal, whatever, will become overweight if they eat too much and don't burn off enough calories in their daily life, actually the control of body weight is rather more sophisticated than that. And we know that body weight, the amount of fat that we have in our bodies, is really closely regulated by a combination of hormones and our brains. So that there are kind of long-term signals about the status of the body's energy reserves, how much fat we've got, that go to the brain, along with shorter term signals about what food is coming in and into the body and what the body's short-term energy levels are doing. And all of those are fed to the brain and coordinated into the kind of conscious thoughts that we or our pets are aware of in terms of feeling hungry or feeling food or fancying a particular kind of food, high fat, high sugar, something like that. And what we know is that obviously our environment influences that. That if you walk into somewhere full of cream cakes, then it's much harder to regulate your calorie intake than it might be if you were presented with a salad bar. But also, because this is a biological system, then our genes, or our pets' genes, have the ability to influence it at all sorts of levels. And actually, we know that genes are really important. Anyone who's doggy knows that Labradors are obesity prone, and probably would also tend to say, well, the reason they're obesity prone is that they're really greedy. And normally obesity biologists don't use that word. It's a pejorative term, and actually we now understand that it's not about a moral failing about being foodie. It's more to do with how our brain considers food. But that's what vets say. And certainly it's true to say that Labradors in general are one of the most highly food motivated breeds out there. And so a few years ago, I kind of set about studying these guys to try and understand why that was. And I'm going to talk later about the complexity of the genetics of something like obesity. But in the first instance, what we did was quite a simple kind of genetic study, really. We know quite a lot about how the body controls weight and the brain processes involved. And we looked at some genes involved in this leptin melanocortin signaling pathway. So normally, in normal biology, there is a hormone called leptin, which is produced from fat when fat stores are fuller. So, bigger bottoms, more wobble, more leptin, and that's detected in the brain. And there's a response in some nerve cells that make this gene called POMC. And that has a knock-on effect in the brain to reduce food intake and increase how much energy we burn off every day. And that figures, if you've got loads of fat store, then an animal doesn't have to worry too much about getting its reserves built up, perhaps for a winter time or a period of fasting to come. But when leptin levels are low and signaling through this pathway doesn't happen, that's when the body is giving a signal that really, no, we need to build our stores up. We need to have some energy reserves there. So we looked in the Labradors at a bunch of these genes. And when we did that, we found this really striking result with a mutation in the gene POMC, which was more common in overweight dogs than in lean dogs, and disrupted, because we can tell what the consequence of a mutation is likely to be, the signaling through this pathway. So if you essentially are breaking the pathway, you're not ever able to detect that you're overweight and that it's okay to eat less. And so we would predict it would have exactly what people report in Labradors, much more food motivation and much more effort going into seeking food in the home environment. Sure enough, we were able to develop a questionnaire and put numbers on that kind of behavior. And the dogs are more highly food motivated in the home if they have this mutation. We could look at their not only body weight, but their body condition score, which is something that I think you're all familiar with from returning your lifetime study reports. And so if dogs had 2 copies of this mutation, they were on average about 4 kilograms heavier, or half a body condition or a whole body condition score higher. So, not trivial. It's not the whole of Labrador greediness that we've cracked here, but it is real, and it's having a meaningful effect in the population. Since then, and that work's all been published in scientific journals, we've gone on to do some quite nice experiments to try and put numbers on what part of these dogs' response to food is different. What you can see Gabby doing here is putting a hot dog sausage in a hamster cage with holes in the top, and then plonking it on the floor and letting Booty here, who is a dog who doesn't carry this mutation, explore the room for 5 minutes. It's all caught on video, and all of these behaviors are kind of captured in numbers so that we can graph them and statistically analyze them. But actually, just intuitively, you can see that, yeah, she's kind of interested in the sausage, but actually she's just as interested in the new environment that she finds herself in. And then you can contrast that with Ash here, who's one of our dogs who did carry a copy of the mutation, who spent the entire of the 5 minutes absolutely obsessed by the sausage in the box, desperate to try and get hold of it. And I turned the audio track off, but you could kind of hear the excitement as the dog sort of whines and chatters and tries to get to the sausage. Now, intuitively, of course, you can tell there's a difference. And, of course, we cherry pick the nice videos for you here. But actually, it's possible to quantify these behaviors. And what we see is that these dogs are more motivated by the sausage. It's all done after standardized pre-feeding and things. And so what we're detecting here is that the dogs put more effort in response to food. And that signifies that they've got greater hunger as a result of carrying this mutation. That was kind of what I expected. That's what dog owners tell me about Labradors, is that they're really, really foodie dogs. What was really striking was when we looked at the consequence of this mutation in another retriever population who carry the POMC mutation, and that's flatcoats. And what we did here was look in wild type dogs versus dogs with 2 copies of the mutation. And we put them in this modified transport kennel and got them used to it at home, and then put them in at the vet school and let them fall asleep. And then once they were asleep, we measured how many calories they were burning per minute. And we got a really striking result. Now, I don't want to kind of overemphasize the points on this graph, but if you look, you can see that in general, the black points on the graph, who are the dogs with the mutation, sit well down on the graph compared to those with the white dots. And that's important because the height on the graph tells us the dog's metabolic rate. So those dogs who carry this mutation are actually burning off fewer calories when lying around lounging than their non-affected counterparts. And that's a really big deal. This is a big proportion of your daily energy spend on just keeping your body alive. And it all fits with the fact that these dogs are essentially, because of their mutation, getting a kind of starvation signal. Hey guys, you need to conserve energy. You need to go and get more food. That's what they're doing, and we can measure it physiologically. And so just to sum up, we know obesity is a big problem in the human population. We know it's a big problem in the dog population. And what we've done in this study is identify the Labradors with this particular mutation and study them, yes, because it's interesting in Labradors, but also because it's a really important model for how genes affect obesity in the dog population, to really understand that genetic mutations can have a measurable effect on behavior and therefore obesity risk. We can understand the molecular biology of this, and I'm not going to bore you with that today, but more practically, what we see is real differences in hunger in these dogs, and that is affecting how they behave in the home. And then quite surprisingly, we see this effect on their background energy expenditure. And so kind of pull all of that together. This is a unique example. It only affects Labradors and flat-coated retrievers, and it's having quite a big effect in that population. And it's almost like a single gene disorder, really. Not quite, but almost. And so although all those things are a bit quirky about this example, I think it's showing us some important, teaching us some important lessons about obesity and the kind of real world knock-on effects that it has on owners are not trivial. And it means that owners of these affected dogs really have to work hard if they want to keep them slim. They can do it, but they have to work really hard and be completely on it with the management. And I hope as this message gets out there, it means that we as vets can more sort of effectively support people to look after their overweight pets, rather than just tending to blame people, to blame owners for not bothering to manage their animal's weight. I always put lots of thank yous in here because we've had some amazing members of staff who've done the work, and then of course all these amazing owners who volunteered. But you guys know about volunteering and being helpful in research studies. I'll close down my screen share. I'm very happy to answer some questions on that if you'd like, if you've got them.
Okay, we've got nothing in Q&A at the moment. Eleanor will speak a little bit more in a little while about what she's doing with golden retrievers, so don't worry that it's been Labradors so far. Marge, I'm just going to pitch you a few quick ones before we talk about senior dogs, because I think they're probably reasonably simple answers. One question is, what commercial diets are currently safe for DCM?
Well, we don't have an exact answer on that really yet, but I would say any what we would call a traditional diet, any of the big companies, stay away from the diets that have pulses such as lentils or peas, or potatoes or sweet potatoes in the first 10 ingredients. And so far that's all we know. So stay with the known entities that you know, some of the bigger companies who do research, who do good quality control, and have been feeding those diets for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're not going to advise certain brands of pet food on this talk, but we all know who those big companies are. And another question from Pam Kent. Hello, Pam. Are there benefits to feeding fresh fruit and veggies?
We don't have a definitive answer on that, because other than one study, I think it was in schnauzers, there hasn't been a whole lot looking at that. We don't know that there is, and I guess the other aspect of that is for nutritionists, well, and for all of us actually, what we need is nutrients, not ingredients. And we don't know of any nutrients that are in fresh food and veg that aren't somehow otherwise in a good commercial diet. A lot of dogs enjoy them as treats, and sort of like Eleanor was talking about with the problem of obesity, I've got some owners who will give like frozen blueberries and things like that as a treat, which are fine. There are some things that shouldn't be fed to dogs, some types of nuts and other things, so just be aware of some of those. Some of the veg are high in oxalate, so if you have a dog with a problem like that, you'd need to know about that. Largely, probably no downside. We don't know of any distinct benefits other than, I think it was in schnauzers, it seemed to decrease their risk of bladder cancer, but that's one breed who is at risk for that problem. So I can't say that it's going to prevent anything else in Goldies or any other breed.
Yeah, always worth looking at that list of what dogs can and cannot have. I have to admit, I always check before introducing anything new. A quick puppy question before we go into the senior dogs. I'm going to be getting a new golden pup to be trained as a service dog. How do I pick the best food for her? Just, going both sides of the life scale there.
Yeah, kind of top and tail the life side.
Yeah.
There is no one best food. Again, I mentioned this earlier, and how I would direct you on this is, well, our minimum standard for any diet is complete and balanced for that life stage. So get a puppy diet. I would recommend puppy diet, maybe a large breed puppy diet, because they do decrease the risk of some of the orthopedic problems. Don't let the puppy grow too fast. That's sort of the main thing I would. Yeah, just a good puppy diet. And we're going to, as I mentioned, we'll put up a resource for Wasava later. There is a toolkit or a tool on that resource that's called How to Select a Diet. And just it will give you some ideas about how to evaluate the companies and what to look for in a diet. But any good puppy diet is probably fine. Again, as not a giant breed, but a large breed dog, there is some evidence that the diets formulated for larger breeds has some good science behind it.
Excellent.
Don't let them get fat. That's probably the most important thing.
Which 40% of them on the study are. So, we're going to get some.
Yeah, let me say about puppies is slow growth is fine. They will reach their genetic potential growing slowly. They don't have to grow fast in order to become whatever big size dog you want. So slow growth will get there. It will get there more safely for their bones and joints.
Yeah, very, very true statement really for any species. Okay, so back to senior dogs. So the dogs in our study are on average 8 years old, although they range from 6 to 10 years of age. So this is very much a topic, I think, on everyone's mind. So Marge, take it away. I'd be very interested to hear what you've got to say.
The diets for senior dogs, I will tell you another resource for this if you want to read about the nutrients in more detail, and it will be on the slide that I forget if Amy or Eleanor, whoever's putting up the slide later. I do have one. FEDIAF, which is FEDIAF.org, which is the European pet food trade industry body, which also has a scientific group associated with it. And we did develop an entire fact sheet about nutrients for senior dogs that could be really worth looking at. I will say FEDIAF website's not the easiest to find, so just type in senior dog under the search thing and keep looking for it. So in general, senior dogs, senior diets, it's a really difficult question because we're all different at the same age. There's like elderly 50-year-old people and quite young 50-year-old people. There's elderly 8-year-old dogs, and there's quite young 8-year-old dogs. So it's not a year that you can't say, like at 50 you need elderly vitamins if you're a person, or at 8 you need to be on a senior diet if you're a dog. It sort of is how that dog is physiologically aging. Do they have a gray muzzle? Are they starting to show signs of orthopedic problems and slowing down a bit, which a lot of Goldies at 8 will be, but not all of them. So there's the dog aspect of it. Then there's the diet aspect of it. Not all senior diets are the same either. We have nutrient standards for how much you need as a puppy and as an adult. We don't have them for seniors, not for cats or dogs or anybody. We don't have a set. You need this much protein, or you need this much fat, or anything else for senior dogs. The reason that we don't have a set nutrient requirement like we do for adults and puppies is because of the difference in the dogs. 40% of your dogs are now overweight, but the majority of them are in this age bracket. So the overweight ones are going to need different diet from the ones who are maybe on the thin side or lean. The ones who have some orthopedic problems are going to need a different diet than the ones who aren't showing any signs of that. Although by 8, a lot of them will be starting to develop a little bit of that. If they have kidney disease, heart disease, liver disease, pancreas, anything else, then you need to adjust the diet for those problems as well. So there's definitely not a one size fits all for the older dogs. So it's a matter of talking to your vet or a nutritionist. You've got lots of great nutritionists in the United States, veterinary nutritionists, boarded veterinary nutritionists, not people who just call themselves nutritionists who have no qualifications, and there's a lot of those too. If your vet is not knowledgeable about nutrition, ask for a referral to a nutritionist and say, go through, this is my dog's requirements. He's overweight. He's not overweight. I want something for his joints, or I want something for his teeth, or I want something for his kidneys, and work from there. So kind of a blethery answer for, there's not a straightforward answer to that question, I guess, would be the short version.
Which is probably good to know. I'm just going to throw a couple of questions to you going back to the raw food issue. So Stacey says, is it okay to feed your dog raw meat such as ground beef?
For me, I would say not really. There is no benefit to it being raw. One of the things that one study, only one, did look at, as I said, most of them compare meats, raw foods with kibble, which is not a fair, like it's oranges and apple pie. They're completely different. One study did look at kibble, lightly cooked meats, and raw meats, and looked at digestibility, which is about the only thing that raw food sometimes could be an advantage on, is digestibility. The lightly cooked food was the same as the raw. There's no benefit to raw compared to lightly cooked. There's a lot of risk. And I will say that ground beef is actually one of the highest for bacterial contamination. So that's not one I would feed raw at all, in spite of steak tartare, which I did try once in Hungary, but
take the risk. Okay, so there's a lot of questions here, people. Thank you. We may or may not get to all of them. There's one here that I think both Eleanor and Marge might like to weigh in on. A common question, my golden needs to lose about 5 pounds. What's the best way to do that without causing undue hunger?
You want that, Eleanor, or do you want me to take it?
I will certainly have an answer, but do you want to go first, and then I'll follow up?
We probably have the same answer. 5 pounds is not too bad. What's that, 2 kilos? That's not, sorry, Eleanor and I will think in SI units, but that's not terrible.
I do too.
There's several different things. You need an entire diet history of everything your dog's being fed to really know where you want to start. Sometimes you can cut back a little bit on the food that they're getting. Sometimes that won't work, especially if they have to lose a lot of weight. You need to look at what you're giving for treats, snacks, food that goes to give any medications. All of those add extra calories. So sometimes just switching to a lower calorie treat snack food for medications, cutting out the cheese, things like that, can help with that. Beyond that, if you've already addressed those, my recommendation is to use a therapeutic weight loss diet, not an over-the-counter light diet, but an actual therapeutic weight loss diet. They are designed to be lower in calories so that you can feed a little larger volume of them rather than just cutting back on a regular food that you're already feeding them. You can often have to feed a little less, but you don't have to feed quite as much less in order to get a lower calorie amount. They are also increased in all the other nutrients, so that if you are decreasing a regular diet, you might end up with a calcium deficiency or a protein deficiency or something else, because you're decreasing all of the nutrients, not just the calories. The therapeutic weight loss diets will be increased in those, so that they have less calories, but you'll have enough, even sometimes plenty of protein and all the other nutrients that they need. So I would work through that.
And that's all really sensible advice, being completely kind of honest with yourself how much you're really feeding, and then cutting it down by 10% as a good start is really sensible, and being quite careful to think about the kind of calories that might be in the treats that your dogs are getting. But the message that I would like to reinforce there is that the value of the prescription weight loss diets, and there has to be value because they are expensive, is real, and is based on the fact that in general, that they all have different kind of pros and cons, but in general they are high protein and high fiber. And the reason why that works, as well as the kind of nutrient requirements, is to do with that diagram I showed you of the dog and the short and the long-term messages going to the brain about improving satiety. Because essentially the reason why most diets fail in dogs is because the dogs are hungry and they pester for more food, or they steal it, or they scavenge it. You know, there is no mystery to it. You just need to cut them down. But it's hard to do that in a very foodie dog. We all know that if we go on a diet, we get hungry and we want to eat badly. And it's the same for our pets. But actually, the high protein, high fiber diet works at a number of different levels to send messages to the brain that it's okay, there's food in the system, you can feel full for longer. And there's nice experimental evidence that that works, and there's lots of good theory behind why it works. And so although they are expensive, I really do recommend them if you're struggling, and the just cut it down a bit answer doesn't work.
I think Alex Sherman looked at the cost on those and found that it didn't compare that badly on the long run.
No,
it certainly compares better than all the potential disease you might end up treating.
Yes,
that's true enough.
Another good point, you know, obesity leads to a lot of other disease issues. Okay, I'm just going to give you one more question, Marge, and then we're going to talk about Eleanor's research. So another topic that really comes up a lot is on whether any supplements are useful for joint health, particularly as osteoarthritis is so common. And for those of you on the study, of course, you've seen we've added a questionnaire on that, and I'd really like to encourage people to fill that out. Osteoarthritis is massively underdiagnosed, and the earlier we get to that, the better. And we had that question about fish oil as well just before, Marge. So what can you tell us about that? What should we be doing?
The first thing you should be doing is don't let them get fat or take the weight off. That's one of the most important things that you can do to improve signs of arthritis in dogs. And Eleanor didn't go into this, but it is also being overweight is an inflammatory condition in itself, as well as so bearing extra, pounds on their paws. They also have inflammation due to the fat cells that makes the arthritis even worse. So first of all, get the weight down. Get them nice to a nice body weight and body condition score. As far as the supplements, sorry, I'll try not to talk for too long on this because there's a lot to this. There's tons of different supplements for starters, but it's very difficult to evaluate supplements for joints in dogs because often the placebo, when it's used in the studies, also has a very good effect. Because if you give them anything, both vets and owners seem to think that there's an improvement. So unless you can measure it objectively, it's very, very hard to know if there's improvement. But there have been some studies where they did look at them objectively. And several different supplements seem to have a moderate effect. None of them had a profound effect. The couple that did have a moderate effect, one was fish oil. Omega-3 fatty acids are fish oils. So I will often use those. They have some other benefits as well for heart health and for kidneys and lots of other things. So I'm pretty strong on using a good quality fish oil. You do need to know about the quality control for the company that you're using. The other one that had also good efficacy, moderate, not good, moderate, is New Zealand green lip mussel, or the extract of it, which is liprinol, I think it's pronounced. New Zealand green lip mussel also does contain some omega-3 fatty acids like the fish oils do, but it seems to contain some other magic as well. The one that we're often asked about is glucosamine plus or minus chondroitin sulfate. It isn't absorbed terribly well orally, certainly not in dogs. I don't think in people either. I think in almost no mammals is it absorbed terribly well. If it's complex with, I want to say chitin, that's the wrong word, chitosan, one of those. If it's complex with something, it has slightly better bioavailability or absorption in the dog, but not great. In the bigger studies that have been done on glucosamine, it hasn't shown very good efficacy. There are some individual dogs that for some reason, whether it's a placebo effect or some other effect, some individuals, it does seem to help. But overall, the larger studies haven't really shown great efficacy for it. So I'm trying to think if there's any others I should mention right there. Those are probably the main ones we see: fish oil and New Zealand greenlet mussel and the chondroitin sulfate and glucosamine, unless there's another specific one somebody thinks of. Turmeric's been mentioned too, but the studies in turmeric in dogs are not conclusive at this point. That might be another one that it might help certain dogs, but you have to take quite a bit of it and it will stain anything yellow that it touches.
Yeah, not useful. Thank you very much. Right, we'll give you a little bit of a break here so Eleanor can talk to us again. And Eleanor's been a great friend to the study. Just a bit of news before we go into talking about genotyping. So anyone who's got a dog on the study, the DNA from your dog has been isolated. We've been very held up by COVID. But finally, the DNA samples from every dog in the study have arrived at the lab. And so we're expecting those results within the next few weeks. So everyone who's got a dog in there is now going to contribute to some of this genetic work that we're going to do. And Eleanor, if you could take over now and tell us what you've been doing with us so that some of these hero owners get to know what's happening.
Lovely. I mean, I've got a few slides that I might share with you in a minute, but I think it's worth just kind of explaining that, I started with Labradors. Golden Retrievers are another breed which are obesity prone. We've talked about the fact that it's quite common in the lifetime study cohort. And with my vet hat on, this is really important. I think I just wanted to reinforce what Marge said just now, that what's the best thing you can do for the nutrition of your senior dog? You can keep it slim. And actually, that's real and important. We know that there are all sorts of problems, not only as Marge said, mechanical, but also to do with inflammation and increasing cancer risk, which is obviously a particular issue in the Goldies. And there's some pretty stark numbers actually from a study that was published a year or two ago, where they looked in a huge hospital population in the States at how going into middle age as a dog, overweight versus slim, whether it impacted on your lifespan. And they broke it down because they had so many millions of dogs in their study. They kind of broke it down by breed, and they were able to give numbers for the Goldies. And I just looked it up just now, actually. And so what they said is that if you were a Golden Retriever who went into middle age overweight, not obese, not dramatically so, but a bit overweight, your average lifespan was around 13 and a bit. And it was about 12 and a half. And if you went in to middle age lean, slim, then it was almost a year longer. So of all the things that we talk about in terms of nutrition, making their arthritis a little bit better, making this a little bit better, actually the one thing you can do is keep them slim, and it might make as much of a difference as kind of 8 to 12 months on average lifespan across the population. So it's worth making the effort, and it's worth thinking about really hard. And so from a genetics point of view, I reached out to Janet and others in the lifetime study, because I knew that you guys had submitted all this valuable information over your dog's lifetime, so that we had information on their weights throughout their lives, and also something called body condition score, which I expect you're all familiar with. That's a bit more like a kind of doggy body mass index, and a bit more useful for the kind of research that we're doing. And knowing that this amazing wealth of genotyping data was coming through, we've been putting quite a lot of effort in over the last year to extract that data, learn how it works, think about the best data points to use. And then we're doing a genetic study, which isn't just looking at one gene at a time, like what I showed you in the Labradors, but is looking a bit more widely than that. And that's where I think it is probably worth just showing you a couple of slides, because it's worth thinking logically about how we find the genes associated with disease. And if there's something that you think is passed down from parent to offspring in a very clear way, a bit like we see with the POMC mutation, you can look at one gene in particular, and you can take a bunch of dogs who don't have the disease, in our case, which are slim, and a bunch of dogs which do have the disease, in our case, who are overweight. And you can look at that particular gene and say, right, are there any mutations? And if there are any mutations there, is it more common in my affected group of dogs? And that's exactly what we did with the POMC mutation to begin with. We took slim, not hungry dogs and compared them to overweight, very food motivated dogs, and found this mutation, found it was more common, and then checked that out in a bigger population. The problem when it comes to studying diseases like obesity is that actually the reality is a lot more complicated than that. Now, that's reflected in the terminology because we term them genetically complex diseases. And I'm using obesity as an example here, but this is something that lifetime study investigators are interested in the context of most cancers and many other of the traits that are problematic in Goldies or other breeds, whereby we don't expect just one mutation to be having a big effect. What we really expect is for many mutations all to be building up, having a little effect to either make something worse or sometimes they're protective mutations. And it's the kind of net effect of all those ups and downs across a dog which come together to create an individual's risk of developing a disease. Often it's made more complicated by the fact that it matters whether they're exposed to something in the environment too. And what that boils down to is a really complex maths problem and a really complex biology problem to try and identify all the potential variation across a dog's genetic material and then work out which of those are more common or less common in affected versus unaffected dogs, and put that all together in a meaningful and clinically useful way. One of the things that's special about dog genetics is that all of our modern dogs ultimately came from wolves, domesticated, it's a point of contention, 10 to 30,000 years ago. But since that domestication, there were then thousands and thousands of years where, although there were types of dog breeds doing different jobs, terriers, hounds, chasing things, defending sheepdog type breeds, broadly, dogs were allowed to mix and breed fairly freely. And it was only really when the Victorians took it upon themselves to formalise dog shows and dog breeding in the 1800s that the problems that we see with modern dog genetics kind of came into play. And these guys had a fad for dog showing. And part of that was that you had to kind of define breeds. And they set up stud books as to which dogs counted as being as part of that breed. And what it meant, there was this kind of lovely richness and diversity of hybrid vigor and health in the wider dog population was kind of forced into little silos of breeds, as they were called, that came from a very small handful of dogs in many instances. And that means that we have this lovely predictability in modern breeds so that you know what you're getting with a breed often in terms of temperament and appearance, but it also has some real problems in terms of genetics. And that's because this transition from kind of wolf to diverse breeding to these modern dog breeds has come with some quirks of how the dog's genomes are organized. That means that we sometimes see diseases being very common in one breed, like perhaps hemangiosarcoma in Goldens, that are really quite uncommon or relatively uncommon in other breeds. It also, fortunately, gives us advantages as geneticists because it makes it a little bit easier to do that complex maths and find the patterns in the data. And that I've tried to distill in this picture here, because what we can do as modern geneticists is identify the variation across a dog's genome and then look for patterns in it. And so usually we kind of line up our unaffected dogs and our affected dogs and try and spot which variation is more common in the affected dogs. And that's really difficult if you've got a very outbred multi-breed population, like you can see in this picture here. If you look within a breed, they're all so similar genetically because they came from that small founder population, that actually it's a lot easier to pick out the patterns. It's pretty easy to spot that there's lots of orange dots in the lower part of this in the affected dogs that are absent from the unaffected ones. Actually, those patterns often are there. If you look in a more diverse population, it's just a lot harder to pick them out. And so one of the advantages and one of the big strengths of the Golden Retriever Lifetime Study is that both for Golden Retrievers, there is the power to find disease, but also the results from Goldens are likely to be relevant to other breeds too. And only by looking within one breed can we possibly have the maths power to actually get to the answer. And so the genotyping that Janet mentioned just now is that these guys are all being genotyped on what's called an array. So we can get information about 1 million different places across the genome all at once. And that is going to be fed into what we call a genome-wide association study that I'm going to do for obesity. And it will also be involved in all of the other studies that are going on to different diseases in the Goldens. So those are the kind of ways that we're approaching genetic disease in the breed, and in my case it's obesity, but it's the most phenomenal resource that I know lots of people will use wisely.
Excellent, thank you. So, you know, these things take years to put together, but as I said, we're on the verge of starting to look at that, and Dr. Raffan will be one of the first people just to look through that data and start to use it. So we will look forward to seeing the publications that result. Marge, should we put your slide up now that gives those websites? Have you got that one, Emily? Just so everyone can see that as we wrap up here. We're getting to the top of the hour and I'm aware of everyone's time, so I'm sorry for the questions we didn't manage to answer today, but would really like to thank Eleanor and Marge for very generously giving their time to us in their evening and our midday to talk to us about this topic. We will be holding the next Golden Zoomies in September. The topic will be cancer, so I'm sure you're all going to want to show up for that one. We have some pretty exciting studies starting up now that we're really seeing quite large numbers of cancer patients in the study. So thank you everyone for coming. Please come to the next one. It's really great to have this connection with you.
Do you want me to mention anything on this slide quickly, or we?
Why don't you? Yeah, people might want to write down some of these.
Just because some of these I mentioned, and just so you know which ones I was talking about, the wasaba.org, the Global Nutrition Committee Toolkit, that is where you can find, among other things, there's lots of information on that, the information about selecting a pet food, the AFCO, Association of American Feed Control Officials, they have something on theirs called Talks Pet Food. There's also just the AFCO.org, but the Talks Pet Food has some great information about some of the questions that you've had. The FEDIF.org is the European Pet Food Trade Association. That is where there's the senior paper, the senior fact sheet on there. Just type in senior and look for it. The PFMA is the Pet Food Manufacturing Association, which is the UK association. However, they have a lot of information, including some information on obesity and calculating calories and some stuff on raw food that is, well, it's a UK association. It's quite global, and a lot of the information on there. The Pet Nutrition Alliance, or PNA, that's a US-based organization that has a lot of information on their website as well. The Pet Nutrition at Tufts, they do a blog by a couple of boarded nutritionists called Pet Foodology, which is addressed, among other things, DCM, because they do a lot of work in cardiology, in part because one of the nutritionists there, her partner is one of the cardiologists. So there's a lot of papers out with both their names. The American College of Veterinary Nutrition is the board certifying body. If you need to find a nutritionist in the US, they're listed on there. The FDA on pet food, also this is the U.S. Food and Drug Administration is the organization who has collected the data on the foods which were associated with DCM, and they've got some other information about pet food on there too. So I'm sure there's other good ones. These I know are science and evidence based rather than opinion based.
Excellent, and that's what we want. That's why we're doing the study, so that we have science behind what we do. Okay, we're about at the top of the hour, so once again, thank you for attending. Thanks to our speakers, and we will see you in September.